Considering the time, how close you are to, you know, the horror of the residential schools and so, think of the generosity of that statement. I mean, how he was able to rise through history and up to say something like that. So I think that the conversation is gradually being restored. Sometimes it's being restored in an unconscious way, but you can see it in our poetry, you can see it in our plays, you can see it in our novels, you can see it in our images. After all, it's very interesting that in the last 30, let's say the last 50 years, Canadians actually, non-Aboriginal Canadians, having decided that their images, the first time they decided what their images would be, they chose the group of seven and Emily Carr, which are profoundly non-European animist painters, non-Christian painters, animist painters about place and the place of people in the place. In the last 50 years, as the next step, what have Canadians of all stripes chosen as their images? Basically, West Coast, First Nations art, and Inuit art. Now you could say that's exploitation, you could say it's trying to steal it, you can say whatever you want, but it's really fascinating that 34 million people decided, without being ordered to by the government, you know, decided that the image they wanted of themselves was First Nation and Inuit. Fascinating. Can you explain it? No. Do you need to explain it? No. It just happened. And I think what it's an expression of is, if you like, is it's an expression of that collective unconscious of the 400 years experience stretching back through those thousands of years, and it's coming out first through the images, which is the nonverbal. Why through the nonverbal? Because the verbal is still so controlled by the way in which we teach philosophy and history and political science and economics, in which we still deny the importance of Aboriginal people. So the place, you know, what happens in history is things that need to pop out. They pop out where they can. And the logical place to pop out first was in images. The second place they started popping out was things like theater, Thompson Highway, and so on. And now you're starting to see, you know, Joseph Boyden, 3 Day Road. If you ask me, you know, the masterpiece novels of the last 5 to 10 years in Canada, 3 Day Road is certainly the greatest First World War novel written by a Canadian. I'd say it's the greatest First World War novel written by anybody, completely from a Cree point of view. I don't know how many of you have read it, but really read it. It's a fabulous novel. Yeah. It's a fabulous novel. But it shows a certain maturity that's just sneaking up on the politicians and bureaucrats, and on the columnists, you know, who are always a problem, because they're really way behind, because they're trying to make their money out of taking very short-term populist exploitation positions, 800 words at a time, right? So it's sneaking up on them, the return of the Aboriginal idea of this place. Which doesn't mean Aboriginals are becoming, you know, just the same as everybody else. That's not what I'm saying. The Aboriginals are becoming more and more powerful as themselves. But in the process of doing that, they're helping reestablish what everybody else is. We're the beneficiaries of their return, of the astonishing return to public prominence and influence of Aboriginal people. And yet, you know, as I say, most of mainstream education, our architecture, our management, all of that's in denial. Now, you've made an interesting effort here with this new library I was looking at, and also this new circular, I think it's sort of circular discussion hall. Circle, you know, Aboriginal, right? It's great. I mean, these are small things, but they're important things because it shows that we're actually capable of not pretending we're Bauhaus. You know? That we're actually not building buildings because we have a dense London proletariat who are joining the Communist Party. And therefore our architecture should be shaped to reflect that, you know, which is what Bauhaus is all about. We're actually starting to move slowly towards things that, say, Douglas Cardinal introduced us to, which is that, and particularly we can do it now on computers. We couldn't do circles very well to build buildings that were high, but actually we now can, and that's a very interesting sort of technical breakthrough. So I think we have to start thinking in universities about how to reimagine what we're teaching. I think we have to, frankly, explode the philosophy departments. Explode them. The pieces will settle back to the ground. But as they come down, we can catch them and reorganize them in a different way. And one of the things we could do is actually create a different line in philosophy. So that instead of saying that philosophy is Athens, Rome, Rome again, pagan Catholic, and then Germany, France, England, and then it comes over here, floats over here, and then for 400 years we don't have a single original thought in our heads. We just sort of sit here and do footnotes on European philosophy. Yeah? And instead of that, we could actually put it back together with, I'm not saying that there isn't a place for Aboriginal philosophy on its own, but we could actually put it back together with Aboriginal philosophy built into the line, built into the way we think about ideas. And I think you'd find if we did that, it would have a major impact on our capacity to explain things like immigration policy, social policy, federalism, the definition of citizenship in a country which is not monolithic. All of that would be suddenly, we would be able to make sense of that because we would have built into it the philosophical ideas which are actually at the roots of it. But as long as we go on teaching philosophy as if it came out of that European monolithic Westphalian nation state idea, we will make no sense to ourselves. Because those philosophies are destined to produce societies which are virtually the opposite of what we're trying to create here. So we're actually, by teaching them, and teaching English the way we teach English, and teaching French the way we teach French, and teaching political science the way we teach political science, we're actually talking ourselves out of existence. That's why, you know, there's that joke about Canada as a country that doesn't work in theory but works in practice. But the reason is because the theory we're using is an imported theory. Now, I'm not making a nationalist argument here, but isn't it sort of self-destructive to take the nationalism of another country and say that it's internationalism to use their nationalism as yours? That's colonialism. That's not anti-nationalism. That's colonialism. That's passivity. Whereas we actually have something quite interesting to say to the world, for example, about immigration and citizenship. But that doesn't come from Europe, that comes from here. So let me just say that I think we have an elite problem in this country. I think the core of the elite problem lies the intellectual failure to come to terms with our real experience, where it comes from, what its origins are, where the ideas come from. And I think that the result of that is that we're not listening. It's there. You know, it's all over the place. There's a legal philosopher like Sakesh Henderson in Regina, who's one of the great thinkers in the country, Aboriginal legal thinkers in the country, who talks about harmony achieved through balanced relationships. There's people like the lawyer Jean Taillé, a woman, who's a descendant of Louis Riel, who talks about the need to move away from the absolutist European idea of ownership. There are all the major the Supreme Court decisions, Delgaman, Guérin, Pauli, Williams, that are all about the Supreme Court, way ahead of the universities, way ahead of the governments, way ahead of the bureaucracy, saying, listen, there's another way of thinking about this. And they're reaching into the past to make decisions about today. That's what the courts are doing. They're very sophisticated. The rest of our elites are acting in an unsophisticated way because they're unwilling to look at the past, to look for the roots. And if you want to look at how people leap into the future, the way you leap into the future when you're blocked, when you're in trouble, and we're in trouble, what you usually do is you go back into the past, beyond the roots of the apparent problem. You go back beyond that, into the previous period, and you examine it, and you take out of that past something which allows you to leap forward. I mean, that's actually how King James Version of the Bible was done. They went back into archaic language and leaped forward over the language of the Catholic Church. That's how the Enlightenment thinkers did it. If you read them, they went back into the pre-Christian period and found stuff that allowed them to leap over the Christian period. And in this country, there's a desperate need to go back beyond the 1870s, 80s, 90s into what there was before in order to leap forward beyond the prison that we've closed ourselves into.